Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We are back this week. Thanks for giving us a break last week, but we're back with Elena and Joe Salvatore. You guys know Elena from her previous talk with us. She is the JCPRD Culture Division Theater and Performing Arts. Yes, Theater and Performing Arts Program Manager.
Coordinator.
Dang it.
Got it. It's fine.
At the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center. And then Joe, I honestly don't know what your role is. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Because someone didn't send a bio.
Yeah, Joe didn't send me a bio.
That's my for everyone. That is my bad because I did not follow the instructions.
It's all good.
So my name is Joe Salvatore. I'm a clinical associate professor of educational theater at NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. I've been teaching here for 19 years, and I'm also the director of NYU Steinhardt's Verbatim Performance Lab. And so we'll talk more about what that means in a little while.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you guys for joining. Really excited to talk to you guys today. We're going to be talking about the Veteran Story Collecting Project, which started in Johnson County in 2019, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Elena, you were the one that kind of brought that from New York to Johnson County, right? You made that connection?
Yeah. I mean, it was all like serendipitous, right place, right time, an opportunity to collaborate. So how it all kind of evolved was really interesting. I want to say a little something, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go totally off script.
No,
but so how Joe and I are connected is I had the privilege to study under Joe in my graduate career at NYU Steinhardt in the program of educational theater. And I'll say, I'm not trying to embarrass you, Joe, but I'll say one of the great things about the program in educational theater at NYU is each faculty member has a different teaching style, some different pedagogy, and you really get to see all kinds of styles of teaching when you're in that program. And I think as a student that is learning about education and theater, that's beautiful. But I don't have favorites, but I'll say Joe was probably one of my favorites during my career there because Joe is such a compassionate teacher. He has a crazy good organizational brain, is super detail oriented. And while I was there, I took character study, and this will kind of segue. This will segue into what we're talking about. Okay. I promise.
You're good.
It's like a prologue. No.
I don't know how you guys are connected, so that's great for me.
Yeah. Like, how did we get here now? How did we get to this project? But I did character study. I did problems in play production, which is a beautiful course. And then I want to say, Joe, Verbatim Theater and Ethno-Drama was not offered as a course while I was there. It was after I left that I think you started offering it as like a semester course. But I want to say, because that was like 2015, 2014. But we got to do like a unit on Verbatim Theater. And that's how I kind of first learned about what interview theater was, what Verbatim Theater was, about Joe's background. So I've had the privilege to study under him. I would say Joe is, he was an educator for me. He's a mentor and a friend. I don't know if I've ever told you the story, Joe, but so NYU, the program in educational theater, does a forum every year. And my first forum was while I was there. No, not true. First forum was first year there as a student. And that was a forum on the teaching artists. And then we did a forum on site-specific theater as performance. And my thesis was in that. And the following year, we did like a celebration of like 50 years in ed theater. And I went to a panel and I was sitting next to you, Joe. And the panel, I want to say, Monica Pendergrass was on this panel and other people that I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were talking about mentors in your field. And I remember sitting next to you and being like, I want to ask Joe to be my mentor. But I think I like chickened out. But I was just like, and that was like 2016 when I did that forum.
Yeah.
And I got the job at the Arts and Heritage Center in 2018. And Sarah Van Landite approached me, the executive director of Arts Council of Johnson County, about the work they've been doing with veterans and how they were going to do a smart exchange panel that fall 2018, and how I started talking to her about, hey, there's this style of theater called verbatim theater, and this could be really neat to do with veterans. How would I connect you with Joe Salvatore? And I think that's how we, in the Verbatim Performance Lab, and I think that's how that conversation started, as far as like, how do we want to work together and what do we want this project to look like? So we started meeting that fall in 2018. We started having like just initial discussions and about how verbatim theater could work really nicely in the veteran community in Kansas City. And then we started actually having like making plans for the project. And then we recruited teaching artists to interview the veterans. And then we did like a performance and panel in April of 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one person that couldn't be here today is Keith.
Oh yeah.
How does he fit into this? Just so we don't forget about him.
Yeah. So Keith and I actually graduated the same year in 2015 and took character study together and other courses at NYU. But I'd like to hear, Joe, how, so Keith is very involved with Verbatim Performance Lab. So I'd like to hear about like how that came to be. But it just made sense to bring, when we were thinking about the capacity of coaching and training and protocol, like Joe approached us and he was like, Keith is the associate director. Is that the right title?
Yep, that's correct.
It just made sense to get him involved as well. But yeah, maybe Joe should talk about how that relationship formed in Verbatim Performance Lab.
Sure.
I don't know much about that.
Yeah. Well, Elena, it's interesting, it's always embarrassing to hear former students, now colleagues, sort of talk about our work together, because it feels very like, it's just always embarrassing, and in like the best way possible, but like it's
I knew it was gonna embarrass you. I was like, I'm gonna tell
very
this
kind.
story.
And what you should know is that Elena also directed a play that I wrote while she was here. And of the 5 plays in that evening of plays, it was probably the most personal play, because it was really based on was based on my mom in some ways and her sisters. And Elena navigated that play with incredible care and empathy, and I'm really grateful for that, Elena. So thank you.
I don't know why I left that out. That was a good time doing in real time.
Yeah, right. But so when those kinds of exchanges between in the moment, right, faculty student, right, but then like those kinds of exchanges when I experience something special about another human being, like that tells me like, oh, this is a person that needs to stay in my orbit, right? And so when the call came from Elena about this project there in Kansas City at Johnson County, I got super excited about the opportunity to sort of come back and collaborate, in another new way. So let's get back to Keith. Okay, so the Verbatim Performance Lab came into existence at NYU in 2017. I had worked on a project called Her Opponent, which was ran off Broadway in March through May of 2017. And that was a gender-flipped investigation of excerpts from the 2016 presidential debates between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And that project got a lot of press, and it caused a lot of conversation, because when you change the gender of those parties, interesting things emerge, right? And that project is available to look at online at heropponent.com, the archival footage of that project. Fast forward to like August of that year, same year, the play had closed, and I was in conversation with an associate dean here at Steinhardt named Lindsay Wright, And she was like, how's the play going? And I was like, well, we were losing money, so we closed it, right? Don't ever do anything commercial. Don't ever do anything commercial, because all it does is hemorrhage money. And so I said, but I have all these ideas about how we could continue to use this kind of performance. And when we say verbatim, we mean word for word and gesture for gesture, right? So studying a person's words and gestures very carefully, and then an actor works to replicate it. And when I said, I have all these ideas about how to use this, the associate dean was like, well, you should have a lab. Sounds like you should have a lab. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, what do you mean I should have a lab? And she's like, well, you're doing investigations. Like a biologist has a lab where they're doing experiments and research. You're doing experiments and research, but you're doing with performance. You should have a lab. And I was like, okay. So, we started the lab, the verbatim performance lab is a thing, but it doesn't have a physical location, right? And so the first project that we worked on in this idea of a lab, I was acting in it because I thought, I really need, if I'm going to continue to do these kinds of investigations, I need to understand what's happening for the actor so that I can continue to develop my coaching techniques. And so I was in it. And about halfway through the process, I realized, oh, crap, I need a director who can look at what's happening outside of this, because I have no idea what's happening, right? Like acting in your own work is hard to do when you don't have another set of eyes. And Keith Huff, that was his entree into this work beyond the work that we had done in class, in the class that Elena referenced, which was a portrait that he did by interviewing someone and then playing them back. And he became, and we had collaborated prior to that as more traditional pieces of theater, site-specific pieces of theater. Again, good human being crosses your path, comes into your orbit. I realize this is a person that needs to stay in the orbit, right? Needs to continue to revolve, right? And so, and I trust him implicitly. That's the other thing about art making, right? Is that you have to make it with people that you trust. When you make it with people that you don't trust, it's really harrowing. And so I knew that I needed someone that I trusted to feed back to me, that I also believed would tell me the truth, right? Because that's the other weird thing, is that there are these dynamics sometimes, even when someone leaves your orbit as a student, that's a hard habit to break. And so Keith and I had worked together enough, and I trusted him to tell me the truth. And so he came in and was the kind of outside set of eyes on that project, and then just continued to be involved from then on, and has become the associate director. He's the lead artist on projects that we do. He is a co-collaborator on this project that we're coming to do in Johnson County. So that's how Keith factors into the mix.
Awesome. Thank you. So the Verbatim Performance Lab existed at NYU, and then it kind of made its way to Johnson County. So how did it migrated? How did it become, okay, backing up. Sarah Van Lendite approached you, Elena.
Yeah.
And she, because I was kind of in on it, but not really, in 2019, but
Yeah.
in the veteran storytelling project. So how did the veteran interviews, how did that work?
Yeah, and that talking about this will be a great segue into what happened in 2020 and how we're doing it now. So when I started in May 2018, Devin Graham, who's the fine arts coordinator at the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center, and Sarah actually got a grant through the NEA. I'm gonna mess this up, I think. Was it through the NEA? But the program was Buy One Vet One, and so that was the first kind of programming we were doing to cater to the veteran community. And the sense of Buy One Vet One was, if you pay for an art class and pay a certain amount, this amount also is going to go to a veteran in the community getting to attend this art class, this fine art class, for free. So in that way, we were already engaging the community. So Sarah, Devin, and I sat down, and me as the new performing arts coordinator, Sarah was like, so how can we incorporate performing arts? Like, we have this panel coming up, the Smart Exchange panel in the fall, all about like how the arts help acclimate and integrate veterans back into civilian life. How can we have an outlet for veterans in the performing art world? And my brain, because I'm so intrigued by verbatim theater and the ways that it's you think about embodiment, or you think about stepping into someone's shoes, the way that it almost twofolds cultivates empathy. Like, it's empathy, the actor experiences empathy by paying such close attention to the text that they're trying to learn, like they experience empathy. But the veteran has its own experience, or the participant that was interviewed, not just veteran, but in this case, obviously veterans, they have their own experience of hearing their words performed back to them. And we thought it would just be kind of fascinating. So we approached it like from a programming standpoint. And, whenever you pilot a program, you always are like learning, how will I not do it this way next time? Or, like what worked, what didn't, And so it was an adult acting program for adults in the community, actors in the community, to come and learn the protocol of verbatim theater over 3 weeks? Yeah, over 3 weekends, right? Like, the first weekend they learned with you and Keith.
Yep.
And then they did some coaching with me, and then we pieced it together, and then they had the performance. We had the performance in the Commons of the Arts and Heritage Center. And there's a really beautiful community-based component I want to talk about too, that I don't want to leave out from that evening. They did that. They culminated in like a performance, an evening performance, and then a panel. So we got 3 actresses involved in the community.
Elena, can we?
I'm taking off. I'm sorry.
Well, I realized, and I just realized we're using some terminology here that I'm not sure we've defined carefully enough for listeners.
This is important. Yes.
And so is that okay if we just,
we backtrack?
So we're at 3 actresses. I think maybe we back up for just a second and say, and I realized I should have done this earlier, so I apologize to our viewers.
I love it.
But I feel like, so just to say, when we talk about, so we understand what a documentary is, right? Like what a documentary film is, right? And so in theater, we also have something called documentary theater, which is largely based, usually based on found facts, could be testimonials from court trials, could be letters that have been exchanged between people over time, could be interviews that are conducted. And so the person that is most well known in the United States for this work is Anna Davier Smith. Her piece Fires in the Mirror, Twilight Los Angeles, 1992. Most recently, Notes from the Field, which is an HBO special that you can watch. This style of theater also can be referred to as verbatim theater. All right, and verbatim, again, meaning word for word and gesture for gesture. And so in an academic setting, both of these styles are referred to as something called ethno-drama, because if we think about ethnography or around anthropology, describing culture, describing phenomenon, this is what ethnographers do. And so ethno-drama is the fancy academic term for what theater makers make, which is documentary theater or verbatim theater. And then what we do in the lab is verbatim performance, which is also related to all those other 3 terms. And when we talk about verbatim performance, we're talking about replaying a section of an interview or a media artifact, literally word for word and gesture for gesture. So when Elena talks about an actor playing a veteran who's been interviewed, the actor has conducted the interview, they've chosen a section of the interview that's transcribed, and then they use the audio recording of that interview and the transcript to learn the text, right? And in a traditional play, a more like a fictional play, we would say that an actor very carefully studies a script to understand what the world of the play is, what the given circumstances are, so that they can make choices that the character would make in the circumstances of the play and the world of the play. In verbatim theater and verbatim performance, those circumstances are dictated by the speech and gestural pattern of the original individual. So it becomes a very technical kind of studied way of creating a character. I had an actor one time, a student referred to it as the calculus of acting.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
Because it's very technical, and you start with technicalities before you start with the imagination. So it's more like learning a piece of music than sort of, for those of you out there that are listening around acting, then you might approach like a script for acting. So for musical theater, folks tend to be really good at this work. Folks that have training in Shakespeare or classical texts tend to have a strength in this work, because it's very much based on rhythm and cadence and an attention to those things. And so that's, sorry to interrupt there, but I felt
No,
like
it's so important. I was just going off. Yeah, no, terminology is really important, and also like gauging the audience. If someone doesn't know anything about verbatim theater, we're rattling off all these terms that it's like, what are you talking about? So thank you. I was driving my train.
You drive the kitty car. Drive the kitty car. You go back to driving. I'm getting back in the passenger seat. But so you were at 3 actresses. So the 3 actresses in 2019.
And I think that's a good segue too. I love what you said about it, musical theater actors tend to be pretty good at this, but also, so we had 3 different actresses, 2 that are regular performers in the community. We had Shauna Downing, Erden Schultz, and Ebony, I'm blanking on her last name, but Ebony was not traditionally a theater artist, but I felt like she took to this protocol really well, and she had a really deep, rich voice too. That it's just interesting when you see certain participants and who really kind of thrives in this format, and who sometimes, if you're overtrained as an actor, it can be a barrier, I think, or overtrained in a certain style of acting. Would you agree with that, Joe? Like,
yeah, I think I would say, yeah, you have to be open to different ways in.
Yeah,
I think is how I would describe it. And so, yeah, if any of you saw, just to use like a popular, so if any of you saw the movie, that Queen movie that was recently, which I can't remember, where the actor who won the Academy, Rami Malek.
Yes.
Rami Malek won the Academy Award for playing Freddie Mercury.
Right.
Where the footage of him playing the Live Aid concert in Wembley Stadium, on YouTube, you can Google, there is footage of Rami Malek in that movie on top of Freddie Mercury from Live Aid, and you will see like an amazing example of a verbatim performance. Yeah. Rami Malek is executing that performance so precisely, not to mention all the people around them. That I would love like a behind the scenes like outtake of what was going on there, because it's extraordinarily accurate in terms of gesture. Even the way like Freddie Mercury kind of bared his teeth when he sang, Rami Malek was doing the same kind of mouth movement. So it's pretty amazing. And that is, the reason that comes to mind is one of the actors that works with us in our lab here, Susie Hunt, went to school with Rami Malek. They were near each other in years at the University of Evansville. And I said, what did they do at the University of Evansville that makes both of you so good at this work? And she was like, a lot of classical text training.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of voice and speech work. And I said, oh, makes sense. So just, it's an interesting thing to think about in terms, like when you say, you know, the kind of actor that thrives in this environment, some of it depends on their openness to new things.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's called Bohemian Rhapsody. I had to look it up.
Yep. I thought that what it might be called, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I knew exactly what you're talking about when you're like Queen movie, and I haven't seen it, so
I
now
haven't seen it either, other than that footage. So
Yeah.
After this, go watch it.
yeah.
So 3 actresses.
Yes.
So yeah, they did the training. They interviewed 3 different veterans in the community, 2 females and 1 male. And one thing I want to note with that is the veterans are all identified as artists too. One of the veterans, Gary Cogwalker, had artwork in our Creative Commons at the time. Michelle Pond is a photographer and poet and creative writer. Tara Knighton is also a writer. So they also all identified as artists. And it was kind of important to note, and this showed up in some of the interview transcripts, this idea, not the stigma of being a veteran, but all of the extra story that goes along with that word that sometimes isn't correct or is preconceived, and getting past that as a barrier, right? And I think using verbatim theater is a great way to do that. It's because when I think about the portraits that we picked, Joe, it's interesting because you could have, you have a whole 30-minute interview to make a transcript of, and then actors land on like a 2-minute portrait.
Yes.
And it's funny, it's not always like,
I'll be right there.
it's funny because it's not always like, it's not always something super dramatic, but it's something really real, right? Like, it's not always like what you would think you would want to hear a veteran say, maybe, or a story from combat. It could be something about, like, one of the portraits was about like how art making helped this specific veteran, and you see the humanity in that. And I think that's the purpose of finding these portraits. So they landed on the 2-minute portraits. They presented them kind of like in the round in the Creative Commons. We had the audience travel through, and the community-based portion of this is the audience was given different blurbs of these portraits of this transcript, and they were supposed to figure out like a sentence from it, where that sentence belonged in the 3 different monologue portraits that they heard. And at the end, they had to work together, kind of building the monologue back. Am I saying this correctly too, Joe? Because I know this part was kind of your brainchild, and I love how it all played out. But yeah, so it turned into a community-based project, in that the goal of this project was to really cultivate empathy and to really have civilians listen and pay attention, specifically in this instance to text, and how they can kind of work together to build the text back, I guess.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful.
Yeah, because I think what we were thinking in that is, we're how closely are we really listening, right? And so the idea that you enter an experience and are handed a line of text, and then that line of text, you've read it before the whole event begins, but you will hear it as the event unfolds, as you move to these different locations. That line of text is from one of the portraits, right? And then they were each different colors. I think we had yellow, blue, and red. And then you got together with your other colleagues who had the same color, and then your job was to reconstruct the monologue by putting those pieces of paper in order, right? And so, and what it did is that beyond giving the audience a task, it also catalyzed dialogue amongst the audience, and which was mixed, right? There were veterans, there were civilians, and so the act of coming around together to complete a task prompts conversation right there around the board. And then we went into a more formal, like, let's have a panel, let's do a more traditional exchange. But I think that the priming of the pump, if you will, at those moments where people were working to rebuild the monologues, actually caused the water to flow more freely during the community dialogue, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing, Elena, that I want to point out is that's important for what you're saying around empathy, is that one of the things that we do in my lab here is that, generally speaking, actors are encouraged to play across identity. And what we mean by a cross identity is that like a man might play a woman, right? A Black actor may play a white person that's been interviewed, right? A young person may play an older person, right? And vice versa. And the idea around that is that the actor is having a chance to investigate the experience of someone else. Okay, and what do they learn from being in the speech and gestural patterns of someone that's quite different than they are? Anna Deveere Smith, would say that the way that each of us speaks is as unique as a fingerprint. And there's the cliche of walking in someone else's shoes. And I think when you learn the speech and gestural pattern of another human being, that's the closest you can get, because anecdotally, what I can tell you is that the actor begins to breathe like the person that they interviewed or that they're playing back. And then additionally, when we, as audience, when we listen to a story coming from someone who is different bodied than the original person, it causes us to, it defamiliarizes us, right? So, and suddenly we're listening in a different way because it's not so much playing on our emotions and causing us to have like an emotional response. We're actually having an analytical or critical response because there's some cognitive dissonance in what's happening, right? So if I'm playing back the story of a woman and that becomes clear as I'm playing it back, there's an initial moment of like, hold on, why is that bodied person playing that story in the audience, right? And so it wakes us up and sort of shines a different light on what the audience is experiencing. And I think that is partly what was happening in the event in 2019. And I think particularly it also happens for the interview participant. The veteran in experiencing themselves played back in this case by a different bodied person is also like, whoa, I said that?
Yeah.
And oh, right. And so, we see ourselves on these, like we're constantly seeing ourselves on these things, right? Constantly, Instagramming this, storying that, and I think we're desensitized to that. But when we see ourselves played back by someone else, there's a level of awareness about ourselves that we gain that we don't get when we look at ourselves on video.
Yeah.
I remember, I'm almost 50, so I remember vaguely like the first time that like some relative of ours had a video camera and we could see ourselves played back, and that was stark, right? Now, young people, like they're coming out of the womb and they're being videotaped, right? So like, that is, that we are anesthetized to seeing images of ourselves, right? That's not stark for us as much as it used to be. I think that's my theory anyway. So this playing back by someone else is really revealing on many, many levels. So.
And I think there's something kind of to what you said, Joe, when you with social media, with stories, with Instagram, with how you can curate that, right? Like you can curate how you want to be presented. And there's something kind of beautiful in the unmasking of being played back exactly as you presented. But that leads to, we could talk about this for hours. I feel like Verbatim Theater.
Yeah, Allison,
and we're already at 3:30.
Sorry, we didn't mean to like hijack your questions there.
But it kind of segues to the care that goes into the protocol, like why it is so, like there's specific interview protocol that has to be followed in the care of the interviewer to the interviewee. And this idea that yes, you're going to be played back kind of exactly as how you present, but there will be a lot of care involved in that,
Yeah.
And I would say in 2019, one of the veterans, the most powerful moment I think of that night was when Gary said, "This is the first time I realized how much my words actually matter, how much my story matters." And it was like, that's why we do this work,
Yeah.
So.
Well, and if you think about it, and Elena, you did it and I've done it. I've also been played back 5 or 6 times. So I understand what it feels like, right? It's uncomfortable every time, but usually in a good way, right? Because I'm like, oh, I do that. And I now understand that I do that and what the potential impact of me doing that is, right?
Absolutely.
But I think that generally speaking, I mean, I've been making work from interviews for 25 years now, and I can count on one hand the number of times that an interview participant has come. I can count on 3 fingers the number of times an interview participant has come back and said that they were offended by their portrayal, or they were upset by their portrayal. And it's actually, I have loads and loads and loads of the opposite experience, where people feel seen, heard, acknowledged, and they're like, I can't believe that someone paid that close attention to 2 minutes of what I said, right? And it requires a level of attention and care. Elena used the language of care and an attention to ethics, right? And like even from a full interview that might last an hour, what 2 minutes am I going to choose to portray? And it doesn't always need to be like the gut-wrenching moment, right? Sometimes we need levity. Sometimes, you know, I usually encourage the interviewer to choose the moment that they feel crystallizes the essence of this individual. What do we need to know about this individual that they've shared with you in that time? And so, and I do this in my class. When I teach my class here at NYU, every student in the class interviews another student and then is interviewed by another student. So they have the experience, they practice the protocol, right? Which when we say protocol, we mean like there's a series of statements that are made so that a participant understands exactly what the experience is going to be. And then there are a series of interview prompts that are a mixture of commands and questions. So describe the circumstances surrounding your birth, right? What is your most prized possession and how did you come to have that possession, right? Are 2 examples of prompts, general prompts that I use. And but then they also in the receiving of their portrait, right, that 2 minutes of playback that a classmate, they are gaining the understanding of what it means to be played back. And in 10 years of doing that process with students here, it is a galvanizing moment in the class every single semester, because students, we did it last semester in the middle of the pandemic in a hybrid class with students online and in the room. And at the end of the exercise, which was all videoed, and I thought this is going to be a disaster because it's all on video, a student raised his hand and said, "This is the first time this semester that I have felt seen." And I was like, okay, great. Check, please. Right? Like, because it's, and that's, so, you know, I don't want to like, I'm banging on my Verbatim Theater drum here, and I apologize about that. But I just feel it's really important for folks to understand, like, we get excited about this work because we've seen the power that it has for audiences, for participants, for actors. So it's not just one constituency that's benefiting here. It's and that creates community, right? Because those 3 different constituencies are having an experience that is linked by one thing, but the experience is different based on how they're interacting in that triad.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
I love that you touched on the experience of the hybrid learning and trying to teach this format, because that's what we encountered in 2020. I have a really great memory of you calling me in March, and I, like, my daughter's like screaming in the back of my car, and like we're trying to talk about this project because we slated for this project to happen the end of March of 2020. We slated to do it again, slightly different, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too, in that we partnered now with JCCC and the Midwest Trust Center and Kara Armstrong. We gathered more teaching artists. We decided we want to incorporate high school students, again, thinking about this entity of how it kind of this all connects, and this idea of teaching empathy in this format is really fascinating. So we had it all slated. We knew how we were going to do the project. project was supposed to happen the end of March. I remember you calling Joe and you were like, Keith and I are wondering, like, are we going to be able to fly to Kansas City? And I remember being like, oh, it's going to be fine, guys. It's going to be fine.
Yes, I remember this. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Anna's like trying to talk in the background too. I was like, it's going to be fine. It's fine. And then 2 weeks later, it definitely was not fine. And we had to, as we all love to talk about, pivoting. And we danced around like, how can we do this virtually? How can we reimagine this project? And it just got to be where it just didn't seem like a good time to try to do it, with all of the variables involved. But we had grant funds attached to it too. We had a grant with the Kansas Creative Arts Industry Commissions, and luckily we were able to kind of pause and do it again now in 2021. And it's going to look a lot different than it did in 2019. And that we already have 10 teaching artists on board in the Kansas City metro area, excited to learn the form of verbatim theater. They're going to do virtual coaching with Keith and Joe. And then Joe and Keith are coming to Kansas City in May, which is very exciting. I don't know why I crossed my fingers.
Well, I mean, because I mean, I think crossing fingers is good for right now.
Knocking on desk wood.
We haven't learned anything. We've learned to cross all of our appendages and hope.
I
that
mean,
we can, yeah.
I mean, at this point, it's like 5-6 weeks away. So I'm like, it's going to happen. I feel good about this, maybe. But so they're coming on site, and then we're filming the portraits at the Carl. I'm sorry. Were you asking a question?
No, you're good.
We're filming the portraits at JCCC. So we'll have these for like archival purposes. And the hope is to bring those portraits and lesson plans into schools to teach, one, about verbatim theater, but two, about the veteran experience in our community. So that's kind of the Reimagine Now 2021 look of this project. And so we have our teaching artists, and our next step is recruiting our veterans. So if you are a veteran watching this, if you have a family member, if you know someone that you think would benefit from sharing their story. I'm sorry, my cat. Spring's like, I might know someone. But yes, have them. I can put it in the chat or in the comments of the Facebook feed. Have them email me.
Put your email in there.
Perfect. And we can set up a time to chat about the project and go over logistics and all of that. I don't know. I just kind of went straight into where we are now.
No,
I'm like looking at the
I
time.
don't even need to be here because you guys are just answering all my questions. But
I did my homework.
I love it. Yeah, you pretty much just answered everything I was going to ask. What is the virtual factor of this year compared to not doing anything virtual? Are you guys doing part of it virtual, filming in person? Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so just Elena, as I was listening to you, tell the story of the past year and a half, I was just thinking like, what we've learned here in the lab is that this work really lends itself to an online environment. It's really, we have, I mean, I was joking with the two of you before that I've been on Zoom since 8 a.m., doing the ditties today. But part of those, I was rehearsing. Like I was rehearsing portraits with 2 actors today. I rehearsed with 2 actors tomorrow. We've really learned how to work in an online environment, and specifically in a Zoom environment. We've recorded pieces using Zoom. We've figured out ways to help actors home record in really quite clean and technically sound ways. We've collaborated with our colleagues here at NYU TV to get guidance on that. And it's really opened up possibilities for us about working across the country, I mean, we are doing a residency in Columbus, Ohio right now. We have, we're doing a project right now with 12 schools around the US and 60 plus middle school and high school students. And so this, so many artists have been robbed of opportunities to work in this moment. And I am so grateful over and over again that I've been able to sort of work, with colleagues who've been very yes and willing to take risks and kind of figure things out. And I count this project as one of those, right? Because, Allison, to get more directly to your point, like we had, in March of 2020, we said, oh, we'll do this in May of 2020, right? And then it became very clear that for all sorts of reasons, that was not going to be possible. And really grateful to the granting office that is supporting this project, that they allowed us to delay into 2021. That, that is not the case under all circumstances. I think a lot of organizations lost funding that they couldn't use. And so really happy for the support for this project. And one of the things that we talked about is that because we now understand how to work in this environment, that we don't have to shove the whole project into a week of time, right? And so to speak to the timeline that Elena laid out before, like, we're going to train the teaching artists virtually about how to do this work, because we've been doing that for 9 months now, training folks how to do this work. Then they're going to conduct interviews over a weekend or 3 or 4 days period of time, and come back to us with a transcribed section from their interview. And then there'll be the first week of coaching that will be virtual. Keith will coach half the teaching artists. I will coach half the teaching artists. Elena will be in some of those sessions when she can be. And then we'll swap. So in week 2, there'll be virtual coaching with Keith, and I will swap groups. And then we will arrive in Kansas City at Johnson County. I keep saying Kansas City, sorry, Johnson County. And it's a metro. Okay, great. And then, so we'll finish the process following all the socially distanced protocols that we need to follow with in-person coaching for the first part of that week. And then we will film each of the portraits. And when we say a portrait, we mean the section of the interview that the actor has learned. And so by the end of the week that we're there, we'll have 10 filmed portraits, and we will see whether those portraits, are they arranged together into an experience? Are they edited so that 3 of them become a trio of portraits, and then there's a pause, and then we see a couple more. So once we have the material, we'll have a better understanding of how to shape it into an experience for an audience. But so it's really is going to be a combination of virtual preparation and then in-person, like 3-dimensional, being in the same space with actors and filming, which is super exciting. Like, it will be the first time that I am in a room with an actor, like in person filming something, since February of 2020. Wow. So like, I mean, Keith and I cannot wait to get on the plane and come there and be with all of you, because it marks the first time that we will be able to like be in the space for realsies with actors making stuff. So, I mean, we've been in the space virtually making stuff and having a really good time, but there's, it doesn't replace the like, oh my gosh, I'm actually like, that person is in 3 dimensions and I can hear them breathe, right? Yeah. We're breathing the same air. So, yeah. Masked, distance, plexiglass, all those things, right? Yes, we'll be following all the protocols.
So you're almost to the point where you will be filming, and you guys obviously haven't conducted the interviews yet, but I don't know. I'm really bad at asking questions. Why am I the one?
No, you're not. Yes, that's
okay. So two-part question. What expectations do you guys have? I know you kind of already talked about this, but what expectations do you have for the outcome of this year's project? And then what goals do you have if you do it again next year? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
both of you can answer, either of you can answer.
Elena, I'll defer to you first.
I had a feeling. I I think so. When we started thinking about doing this in 2020, one of our goals was to train teaching artists in this protocol of verbatim theater to eventually bring it into schools. And now we're kind of reimagining that, in that, yes, we're training teaching artists in the protocol of verbatim theater, but we're creating content that can be used in lesson plans. So I think my hope would be, I'm super excited about the 10 teaching artists we have on board to do this. It's varied ages, demographics, backgrounds with the arts too. And I think they're all gonna commit and be yes and people, which we love in ed theater. We love the yes and people. But I'm excited to see them grow from this experience and what they take away from it, whether that is some of them work in schools, some of them work for other organizations. Maybe they create their own residency about verbatim theater, after this experience, that they bring to schools or organizations, or maybe they teach a unit on verbatim theater at their high school if they're a high school teacher. So I'm excited about that and this potential to bring more awareness to this form, because I feel like in this part of the country, there's still there's room for clarity on what this form is. So I'm excited about expanding the net, if you will, of people that know how to do this. And I'm excited about how we can create lesson planning content from these archives, from these portraits, and how we can, again, continue to connect civilians to the veteran experience, whether that's civilian youth or adults. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I would add to that is, I think it's, I think that it's very useful to read like reports, academic publications, charts and graphs, about like something, right? And in this case, the something is the experience of veterans, both during service and when they return back into their communities, right? So we could do a lot of Googling and a lot of searching of academic journals and even popular press, and read about these experiences and look at statistics. And I think that what excites me about this work across the board, but in particular with this project, is that I learned a lot from hearing 3 stories, right? And because they were about specific folks who I had a chance to lay eyes on and also bear witness to, and maybe not, and they weren't, even if I did not know who they were, the fact that they were embodied before me by an actor, that the story is embodied, makes it, I think, more impactful. And so I'm more apt to advocate for, be aware of, have consciousness of issues that affect veterans. I mean, my brother-in-law is a veteran, and that experience of coming to Kansas City and doing those interviews and being in the presence of those stories made me have all sorts of things that I want to talk to him about, right? And I'm still working on that, right? Still working about how to navigate those relationships, with him, but it allows me to gain insight into what maybe some of his experiences were, so that I know better how to approach that conversation, right? And I think, I always learn something through this process. And so, we'll be guided by questions that we have and the protocol that we use will be guided by those questions. And so, the goal is to get answers to those questions if we can, right? And to not, it's not assumptions, it's answers, right? And frequently the answer is unexpected, which is what makes it exciting.
Right. Yeah, I'm super excited just for the realness of it. And like I said earlier, I was kind of in on it in 2019. I was working more on the fine art side with Devin. So I'm really excited this year to sort of be, observing the theater part. My dad is a veteran as well. And so I have the privilege of just being able to be like, hey, Dad, tell me about this, but I think learning from 10 other veterans is going to be super exciting and super insightful. So I'm really excited. Last question, and then I'll let you guys go. How can people view this when it is done?
That's a really good question. I don't think we fully landed on how we want to. I know initially we want it to be for high schoolers in schools. That being said, and that's the exciting thing about this work, we don't have the script yet. We don't know the content yet. We'll know that content after we get those portraits and transcripts. So that will kind of inform, I guess, where it lands after that. Initially, yes, it's going to be an educational focus. It's going to be archives. I want to say we want to get these to schools like that Monday before Memorial Day, the 24th, is when we want this all done of May, to potentially use as like a Memorial Day lesson plan, if you will. I'm trying to pull up my calendar here. Yeah, May 24th is that Monday before Memorial Day. And so that's kind of our target. Send it out, contact educators, let them use this material for lesson plans. And then after that, maybe it ends up on Verbatim Performance Lab's website. I don't know. It's possible.
Yeah, totally. Allison, I've realized, this is related to the second part of the question that you asked before that I didn't answer, that neither of us answered, which is like going forward, right. What, and I think that, in my mind, we are, we are gathering stories, right? We are gathering, collecting stories that, and this is not dissimilar from like oral history, right? No. Except that frequently oral history, gets recorded and then it sits in an archive somewhere, and then like somebody in a library may come across it at some point, right? Or we may hear it, on NPR or whatever. We might get a snapshot of something. But the performed aspect of this, I think, is what makes it dynamic. And so the idea, I think, is that we would continue so that this bank of portraits of experiences just continues to grow, right? And so, it's not lost on me that we do this project, where the World War I Museum is located, right? And when Keith and I came the first time, we went to see that museum, and I think it had an impact on both of us and affected our work on that project for the rest of the time. And so I think of this collection, this gathering of these portraits, that it doesn't stop, it just continues, and that they can be used in a variety of ways to raise awareness about the experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on. I love
Should
that.
we put the link in the chat to Verbatim Performance Lab?
Not yet, but I will. Is it, is it just?
It's steinhardt.nyu.edu/Verbatim Performance Lab.
That's where you can see all of the glorious things. I'll say too, it's interesting to hear. Allison's trying to end it. I'm sorry.
No, go on.
It's interesting to hear that it started in 2017, because I'll say, Joe, like when we did this project in 2019, perfect. In the last 4 years, I feel like this lab has grown so much. Like I've just been following what you've been doing and all of going to the caucus in Iowa. Like you've really built so much momentum, and I just want to acknowledge that and encourage those who are tuning in to check out that website and see all the all the amazing projects they've done in the last 4 years. So
Yeah.
Appreciate that, Elena. Thank you. So I'm sort of captain of the dork squad on this work, so I can't stop doing it. It's a little bit of
I
a
love it.
problem. So I mean, a good problem. It's a good problem to have when your work, you know, when you're so excited by your work that you just want to keep making it. I feel it's another thing I feel incredibly grateful about, is that the work that I do is fulfilling to me on many levels. So yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you guys so much for taking time out of your day to talk to me about the Verbatim Performance Lab and the Veteran Story Collecting Project. And I'm super excited to be part of it, to partner with you guys with the Arts Council. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks for having us. It was
Absolutely.
great.
All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Be well.
Bye.